was just surprised when we were talking about the strongest growth industries.
Yes.
Social assistance and healthcare were low-wage industries.
No, okay, that was just social assistance. That was just the social assistance part of healthcare. Healthcare is not, healthcare in general is not low wage. It gets a little tricky there too because remember these are averages over an occupation in an industry. So I think as you're aware, there are some healthcare workers that don't make very much, and then there are healthcare workers that make a tremendous amount of money. Yes, and you're right. Healthcare is not a low-wage industry in Michigan. The gentleman in the back.
Yes, this may or may not have a relationship to the subject, but it may have. What do you think is the long-term consequence for the United States with its long-term debt to China?
That's a little outside of my. That's a little outside of my area. In the short term, it's not hurting us very much, but in the long term, that is a concern. Yes, I mean you ultimately have to pay your bills, and so. We do see the Chinese economy slowing a little. It's still growing at, it's growing very rapidly, and one waits to, I just don't think you can sustain that kind of growth that they're sustaining, and even the Chinese government's concerned now about it, and they've slowed things down through some of their policies. But they are, I will say, they're a growing player in the economy, so they're also a heads up to your question as to what are the things we should be looking out for. Yes, sir.
I haven't heard you mention at all the agricultural sector, and only briefly in this Q&A did you mention tourism. I'm
Yes.
wondering about both of those sectors and what significance and role they have.
Well, on the tourism, the reason is there's not in my data there's not a category called tourism. It's accommodations and it's restaurants and it's, but so that's why I haven't, you don't see on my list tourism. But I happen to believe this is, as I said a few minutes ago, that this is one of I think one of our greatest opportunities. Because you have to ask yourself when you're deciding where to invest is where your assets are. I remember presenting something once in the Upper Peninsula. Is anyone from the Upper Peninsula here before I say that? And they stuck up their hand and said, well, we want to be a high-tech center, so that's what we're going to focus on. And that was difficult for me because I said, well, you don't really have the assets to do that, and other people do. Well, in tourism, we've got the assets, and we've got the biggest one of all, which of course is the Great Lakes. And I think we could take more advantage of that. Now, agriculture. That's a tricky one. All the stuff I showed you today is total non-farm. When I said total employment, that's total non-farm employment. So why? It's not because I'm avoiding talking about that. It's simply not in the government data that we use. Well, why isn't it? It's because I'm no expert on farm. I'm no expert on agriculture, I'll say that. But it is just very, very difficult to get a handle on it in terms of the way that I do things with these data. You have wage and salary workers, which are all of these in farm. You also have self-employed. The self-employed are part-time. Sometimes some people classify themselves as farmers when they're marginally farmers. It's a seasonal industry. There's migrants. A lot of them don't register, of course, with the in the UI unemployment insurance data. So it's always been a very difficult thing for me to get my arms around. So it's not in my numbers. I usually don't talk about it. Now, if you want to say, is it an important industry? Yes, especially regionally. And some of you represent rural regions, and I certainly understand that. As far as I can tell, it's growing. I think it's getting more competitive. It has relatively low earnings compared to other industries. I'm telling you everything I know about it. And so it is a missing part in this analysis. But it's difficult for me to say even how big is it relative to other things. I know there are lots of things out there that say that. And I'm not contradicting or accepting them. I'm just saying simply, I can't get a fix on it, and therefore it's not part of what I do. But I'm not dissing it. But it's as simple as that. And I hope that's probably not a totally satisfactory answer for you, but it's what I know. Doug Drake for the last question.
I haven't asked you this one for a couple of years, George. Relative dependence on autos. Obviously, somewhat smaller.
Yes.
But how much smaller?
You saw my chart. You saw my mountain. Yes. Are we a little, you answered your question. Are we a little less dependent? It seems to me, yes, we are. Some of that was forced. Some of that was intended through policy. But we're still heavily dependent on it. And to be honest, we might become less and less dependent. But there's no time in the near future that I don't see us fairly dependent on that industry. I just don't see it. And so we got to keep an eye on it. Anything else? 1, 2, 3.
Don't go away.
Don't go away.
Dr. Fulton, on behalf of the Alumni Association, the Office of the Vice President for Government Relations, we have this 14-karat gold Wolverine Caucus pin as a show of our appreciation for this excellent presentation today.
Well, thank you so much.
I'll put it in my pocket while I'm driving around this town.
And we were also joined during the program today by Representatives Marcia Hovey-Wright and Jeff Irwin. Want to thank you again, Representative Kandrevas, today, and to all of you for being here. We hope that you will join us again on February 14th when we'll be talking about mining in Michigan. So until then, have a wonderful day. Go Blue.
Empirical data helps us much more because many of your students
welfare system that's K through 12 teachers.
And that's why I say this. I agree with you.
Thank you very much. Sure, of course. But you don't want to wake up early enough. Because you're going to be here late tonight. Yeah, oh, I'm sure. Busy day. This is busy day for public radio because they actually cover a lot of it. I've heard the meetings and the constant on the drive up here. And they always put the trumpet music. I'm like, really? The trumpet music? People expect, I guess. Well, I hope you can use some of this.
Yeah, actually, we will. Rick did a quick overview of the.
Sure.
We need to get it.
Oh, yeah. Always look to see if it's paid for or if it's just part of a study or part of an overall education.
My gauge is.
A lot of this stuff is generated. I see in Lansing, I'm vice chairman. A lot of these insurance stuff. You're going to have thesis that are very high and reputable. It's great. Put some colors on it. It looks nice, but but my last thought of that is they can't tell us that. And I'm not saying I want a written guarantee.
So next time.
40% less.
Well, if you draw.
Some changes. Well, there's no guarantee.